Morning, everyone. Welcome to today's sessions with Med Talks for Teens. I'm Senna, and I'm here today with Dr. Zachary Bernhard, who is an ortho resident in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm going to go ahead and hand things off to him just to go ahead and introduce himself, and then we can continue with the conversation.
Hey guys, I'm happy to be here. Excited to talk to whoever's on the call right now. Like you said, I'm Zach Bernhard. I am a third year orthopedic surgery resident here in Cleveland with the Cleveland Clinic System. I'm originally from Ashland, Ohio, so it's a smaller town about an hour south of here. And I did my undergraduate degree in biochemistry at Ashland University, and then went on and did my medical degree at West Virginia. So spent some time down there and then found my way back up here.
So can you just talk a little bit about your experience with residency, what year you're in, and things like that? A day in day-to-day life, I guess.
Yeah, so I'm a third year resident now, so in our program, every program's a little bit different. But regardless of program, when you're in an orthopedic residency, it's pretty grueling. It's one of the probably more physically demanding specialties, but that's what we get into, and that's what most of us know we're getting into when we get there. So day-to-day life, we start our sign outs at about 5:30 in the morning. Again, that's dependent upon what program you're in and where you're at. But we start at 5:30. We run a list that varies from anywhere from 15 to 40 patients. We cover a busy level 2 trauma center on the daily. So when we're a part of our core rotations, we're always handling the patients that are coming through there at the trauma center. Um, we do go out and get a level 1 trauma experience elsewhere, but we really do get a pretty good trauma experience here at our program. So we're always handling a pretty wide breadth of pathology and a ton of community trauma from day to day. So we finish our sign out. We normally go to our respective facilities, whether that be an ambulatory type setting or a clinic, or we head to one of the other hospitals like main campus or one of the other regional hospitals. And then we follow kind of a mentorship model here at our program. So we're with one particular attending assigned to him. And so he or she, wherever they go, we kind of follow them around. So we do that month to month or 2 months at a time. And then, whatever they have on the schedule, we are a part of those surgeries or those clinic days. And we aid. And, just like any surgical subspecialty or surgical specialty, it's kind of a graduated autonomy. You don't walk into the OR day one and you're not expected to just be operating, right? So you start out in your intern year, you get a little bit of hands-on experience. You only do about 6 months of orthopedics. That's kind of an ACGME thing across the board. Um, you start to get a little hands-on, and then in your second year is really when, in our program at least, you get a ton of increase in autonomy or increase in, I guess, expectation and responsibility. Um, you'll be expected to field a ton of consults, take a ton of call shifts. For us, it's like 6 or 7 24s a month. Um, again, while fielding the day-to-day responsibilities of whatever attending you're with. And then that call responsibility goes down a little bit as you go throughout the program. So again, you get some graduated autonomy. You're expected to kind of lead the cases a little bit more. The increasing difficulty of case is more, expected of you. So, you go from doing maybe a carpal tunnel to, you go and you should be expected to proficiently, work your way through an ankle fracture. Um, as you move on, I don't know that there's any orthopedic residents who are doing a full-on pelvic and acetabular reconstruction or something of that nature. But by the time in our program you're a chief, you're not taking a ton of call. You take maybe one backup call a month, or one primary call, I guess I would say, where you might be expected to come in, and then you're taking weeks at a time of backup call where you don't really have to come in. But you are, as the chief, you're really expected to be proficient in a lot of the procedures that we do. You're the ones that kind of run the sign out in our program, so all the questions are directed at you. We're very much a resident-led program, and I think that transitions well to going out and running your own practice one day. So as a chief, you're acting as if you're an attending. I think a lot of programs follow the same sort of expectation that you should always strive to function one level above whatever you are, right? So if you're a second year, you should try to strive to be a third year and so on and so forth. So for me, I'm in the end of my third year. So day to day for me is kind of like that day to day, going around with an attending. As I said, right now I'm on elective joints rotation. So it's pretty nice because, you have a pretty set schedule, when you're going to start, when you're going to end. And, unless something unforeseen happens, there's not a whole lot of variety there. It's nice to have a routine. But then I move on to some sports and back to trauma. And so there will be some variability there. Um, I will be applying to a sports fellowship. So in orthopedics, everybody applies to their fellowships in their fourth year. So as a third year, now is when I'm starting to think about gathering some letters and where I may want to go. And so I've started doing some research on some programs, talking to some people, ahead of me and seeing what programs they liked, what programs they didn't like, starting to do a little more networking. Fortunately, at the Cleveland Clinic, we've got a ton of communication and connections with some pretty big names. So whether I'm deserving of being able to talk to those people or not, they are at my disposal. And so making a good impression with them goes a long way. So I will start rounding up letters. I'll start applying in the next fall. So it'll be here next, 5 or 6 months, whatever that may be. And then we find out in the spring of our fourth year where we land for fellowship. In orthopedics, it wasn't always something that people did fellowships. Back in the 80s, 90s, you probably still didn't see a ton of people doing fellowships. 2000 moving forward, it seems like that's become the norm. And I want to say the last thing I had heard was in orthopedic surgery that about 90% of graduates are doing some sort of subspecialization. So I plan on being pretty general, but I do like to kind of lean towards the sports side of things. And I think that our program does a ton of trauma and arthroplasty. So it lends well to get a little extra work in sports. Not every program's the same. Some programs do a ton of spine in their core rotations. So there is some variability based on ACGME and their recommendations. But our program, we don't do a ton of spine. So just all depends on where you're at as to what the best fellowship fit is for you. But that's kind of the structure. I could go into detail on specific calls and things of that nature, but that's, I guess, a pretty good generalized, day to day and what we do. And, other than wearing 20 pounds of lead, that's something you need to know you're going to be walking into if you do orthopedics. You never know how long you're going to be standing there. So there's some nuances and ins and outs that you don't really know about until you get there.
That was perfect. So I know we kind of talked about your daily life as an ortho resident, but just backtracking a little bit. I know me and you also discussed like how there's so many different avenues in the healthcare field. So I guess like kind of why orthopedics, and also like I know you talked about sports, so I see that you own something called HSLD. I hope that's correct.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
kind of
So
how you just tie that all in together.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely so that the Hustle brand or the HSLD, that's something that I recently just started, something I've talked about for a while doing. That's definitely not something that an orthopedic resident normally does or is expected to do, and I'm probably neglecting a little bit of my responsibility. We all only have 24 hours in the day, so trying to wear a lot of hats and do a lot of things at once. And so taking on that extra little bit of work, I think is going to hopefully pay off for me in the future. But that all kind of stems from knowing what kind of practice you want to have in the future too. So for me, I guess I can backtrack all the way to, what has gotten me here. And so in undergrad or even just growing up, I played 3 sports in high school. Played football, basketball, and baseball in a small town here, and then went on and played Division II football at the collegiate level. And so I've always been an athlete. I've always, reaped the benefits of what athletics and a team and coaches and all of that brings you. I firmly believe that I wouldn't be the person that I am today or where I am today if not for that background. But obviously, everybody has a different path to get here, and that doesn't mean that you have to be an athlete to be an orthopedic surgeon. It's still very few, actually, a small percentage of people who are in orthopedics actually were athletes. But there's definitely a preponderance of athletes towards the specialty just because of what we do. The musculoskeletal system is closely tied in. I mean, we're supposed to be the musculoskeletal experts, right? So it's a natural transition and a natural thing that if you're interested in sports and muscles and bones and tendons, or if you've had a sports injury, a lot of people always write in their personal statements how that's what led them to orthopedics. I didn't necessarily have that sort of experience that led me there. My experience is kind of unique in that my dad's an orthopedic surgeon, so I grew up knowing what that was. The oldest of four kids, and so I was, therefore he had me in medical school. My mom and him had me during medical school, so I kind of got to see his residency. I especially remember the tail end years of his residency. Um, I remember him not being around a lot, and that was before the work hour restrictions. But I saw, what the work he put in and some of the things he did, and I always tell a story about him coming in for like a career day at my kindergarten class, and that being kind of the moment when I was like, wow, everybody thinks my dad's really cool. He's a dork, but everybody seemed to think he was very cool. So I said, whatever he does, that's what I want to do. And obviously there was a lot more that went into it in the future that I didn't know about at that time. But I think being an athlete and then seeing just how fulfilling my dad's career has been, and how he's been able to help people and get people back on their feet quite literally. It's a really cool specialty and provides you a lot of independence in the future. So back to, how do I exactly go about starting a brand and, working very closely with athletes? That comes from me wanting to kind of be independent. And I think the brand and what you can do with that in terms of, being your own boss in a world of medicine where, a lot of people are no longer their own boss. I think you can be an advocate for the patient more so than you can be in other settings. And in orthopedics, if you're working with athletes, you can have, performance centers and, you can have like a brand like this that's really a positive, light for an otherwise, I feel like negative thing at sometimes. I know that, everybody looks at the way medicine's going and, it's not the golden days and things of that nature. But, I think things like this can be a way of, being, like I said, a good patient advocate and caring for people in a more, I don't know, personal way, so.
Great. Yeah, that definitely tells us a lot about like you and what you want to do in the future and how you're kind of working towards that. So that's great. Just backtracking a little bit more. So most of us are looking into college. A lot of our audience is teenagers.
Mhm.
So when we see like the whole process of going to medical school, it can look really daunting. And we hear a lot about like burnout and stuff like that, and just like how people have to change their studying habits and like I was wondering if you had anything to touch on about that, like transitioning from high school to college to med school, just your journey with that.
Yeah, no, I could go a million different ways with that. I will say one thing, everybody expects the medical student or resident or everybody like there are times when I'm expected not to sleep much, but that's not really my choice. At no point is it beneficial for somebody to pull all-nighters to think that that's the way to get to, medical school. I never did that in college, and I sure as heck didn't do that in medical school to get to residency. There were people who did that in medical school. Some people would cram and do things like that. If anything, if there's any wisdom I can impart on anyone trying to go into medicine, it's, have a good routine and a schedule, be very regimented. Obviously, you can live in moderation, you can have other interests and have fun. But at the same time, you have to have a very good schedule and always be thinking about the next step. If you're always worrying about what's in front of you, that's a good way to be. And you have to take care of the next most pressing thing, always the thing that's in front of you. But you always have to have in mind what is in front of me, what is way out there in the future, or else, if you get that tunnel vision, you'll never get there. So it's unique in that nature because we practice delayed gratitude to the most extreme. Like there is no other industry where you go into your early 30s prior to, a meaningful or the paycheck, right? There's no other industry where you work and work and work and, you're not on your own, so to speak, until, your early 30s. So it's very unique in that way that you take on these hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans and debt to then work grueling hours to then go on to this, world where everybody's told you it's going to be worth it. So, going back to high school, I think for me, athletics always kept me grounded and kept me regimented. But even then, you don't have to be an athlete, like I said, and just finding something or someone who is, a good mentor to you and a good example of the way to get there. So finding people who have done it before you, picking their brains, and, realizing there is not one size fits all. I think that was the one thing I saw when I matched into a residency was the number of medical students who reach out to you like you're all of a sudden you have the golden ticket, right? Um, there is no one size fits all. Everybody does it a different way. And so you try and instill and impart as much wisdom on them as you can, but you try and also keep in mind that, they're going to do it a different way.